Hey everybody, Professor Reed here. Hope you're doing well. Wanted to post this video that breaks down some specifics for the Discourse community paper. This is for the summer. So, as I said in the last one, some good questions came in email. I want to address those. Try to, I don't necessarily have a source per like a source count for the essay, but I would try to add at least one source in each one of the paragraphs. We'll look at that. And with the interviews, you want to try to add in at least one answer to an interview question. Now, if you're struggling with getting interviewees with the time crunch of this, I would maybe post something on an internet board. I'll talk about some examples of that. But the idea that you're trying to bring in some primary sources. So what I did was I went back to my archives and I found some essays from the past. I'll give a little introduction about like what the discourse community is, but once again, sort of piggybacking off the idea of trying to find source material that is that epigenetic deliberative forensic sources, trying to blend in the interviews to give it that feel of primary versus secondary sources, being cognitive aware of the APA formatting as the guide for this, trying to make sure that you weave in those different types of sources into each one of the paragraphs. And I would say this too from like a stylistic perspective, trying to think about different types of paragraphs that you can use. Now that comes out of like more of like a 101 type of writing, like different types of paragraphs, but it's sort of the blocking and tackling. If you go to get a PhD, God bless you for doing that. No matter what you're looking at in terms of like PhD writing, it can be super intense, but I'm going to guarantee you're going to use a lot of the same basic fundamentals. Think of it almost like a sport. I've coached baseball for years. My son plays college baseball, and like one of the things, my daughter played softball. There's fundamentals to the sport that even like a kid that's really young is going to learn, and baseball and softball they're going to apply all the way up to major leagues. I mean, footwork and staying low on the ball. So there's all sorts of stuff like that we're going to play into. So what I try to do is make this like sample paragraphs about certain groups and show you how they utilize sort of this idea of different types of paragraphs to give you like footholds for the essay. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so there's a group that had papers on. I should also give the caveat that some of these groups are a little bit, some of these can be very contentious. Other groups a little misunderstood. Other groups more, complicated. And I'm a writer. I don't have a PhD in a specific area. I have a Master of Fine Arts. I try to write actively on the books and that sort of thing. So like, I have a journalistic type of background. So I'm not like the expert on a lot of these groups, but that's sort of my goal to sort of be, well-rounded, I guess you could say. Now, there's a group called the Black Hebrew Israelites, and you may have heard of them a couple years ago because there was a pretty big confrontation that occurred between I think a kid who was there on a field trip with the red Trump supporter hat. I want to say it's called the MAGA hat, and there was a confrontation somewhere in Washington D.C. Right? So I want to say that the groups were a Catholic school group, and then this group called the Black Hebrew Israelites. Now, not as familiar with them in terms of their origins, although I did teach over in Camden, New Jersey, and I feel like they had a center in Camden, and they're known for being very aggressive towards people in the like on the streets, and they have a very specific theology, which I'm not a theologian. I don't know the specifics of it, but I want to say they trace sort of their origins back to the tribes of Israel, and they believe that they're the true Israelites. So it's a really interesting sort of like setup there. And I should also say that they, from what I've read in papers, is that they also have like there's multiple variations, and there's like the Southern Poverty Law Center considers them a hate group, but there's another variation of them with the name, I should say, not them. There's another variation of their group that is considered not a hate group. So I'm not an expert in it, but I had a really good paper on it. And what I want to show you is that the student um, used the SPCL. Okay, so perfect. And you can see here, they took that idea of discourse community, and I would hope that as you walk out of a 200 level class, you're going to feel really good about the different types of paragraphs. You're gonna be wondering what you can sort of do for the paragraphs, and this is like going to help you out as you move forward in the writing process across the board. So I would think you'd want to use a definition paragraph. Now, what they did was, if you go back and look at sort of the theme of the essay, they took this idea of definition and they applied it to the Black Hebrew Israelite group. And you can see that it goes into this sort of concept of themselves as a group. It sucks because my photo is going to block the last part of the paragraph. I think you get a feel for it there. And you can see they added in the source material. So maybe pause that, look at it. But what they did was they added the sources, and that's going to be the sources they annotated. And they ended up giving a definition of the group, and they defined vocabulary that they use. And one of the things that's going to be super controversial about them is that they would refer to those of the Jewish faith that we would, they would consider traditionally C. They would say they were going to be a group that they would debate that. Now, we're not saying this is true. This is definitely conspiratorial. And as I said, SP, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has gotten into some pretty interesting controversies, by the way, they've deemed them to be a hate group. So really good paper here with that. Now, I actually mentioned this as well with the interview for this group to add that primary sources in there. We wouldn't want to necessarily reach out to somebody that would be in a hate group, but you can think about former members or a professor of religion. Somebody that's really specialized in this would be a really good place to get started. Okay. Oh, now the next one's going to be, this is like one of those. So I would say controversial groups that's out there. There's a sort of a meme space, and me as a writer and as a professor, I sort of enjoy these groups that gravitate towards like onlineness. So I've had some really interesting papers on the incel community, which comes out of this sort of 4chan space, and the doomer memes come out of like a place on the internet. And a lot of people have told me, because I've had papers on this and we've had discussions in class, so that's a lot of people have mentioned how they have this sort of lean towards a more conservative or right-wing type of viewpoint. Now, the speed of memes is really fascinating to me. And I want to say that the individual in the middle there is called the Wojak meme, historically. And at one point, Twitter was banning the Wojak meme, so that's something you could also sort of tie into this. So I had a group, I had an individual look at this concept of doomers, and it's they have like their own music, and it's sort of this it's like a depressing meme space that leans towards sort of a nihilism, but also has elements of like sort of more conservative. Although, like I said, I'm not an expert in this. I'm sort of like taking this in from papers, but here's a good example of like sort of the ideology. And there is a female component to it, which a student mentioned in a paper before. They're like, well, the meme actually has like the female and the male. Okay, so and what was cool is the student showed in their paper, and this is trying to give you a snapshot of it and something you can sort of think about. They actually showed how the term doomer over the course of 2004 to 2014 was sort of trended up. And I want to say that's like real specifically in the later 2000s. So they were going to say, well, this rise in sort of doomer as a subculture, I guess we could call it, or sort of this internet community, came out of this sort of real specific time period, and that's what the student was saying. There's sort of evolution of things. So really well done with the meme there. And they also created an example paragraph, right? So once again, the goal of the lecture is to give you a feel for the different types of paragraphs you can use. And some of these papers, now to be fair, the papers were from the 15-week classes, and did a really good job of trying to break down the information. they connected it to sort of this idea of Gen Z and how there's the Wojak meme, and they used a website where it was Know Your Meme. It was like a Doomer website. So really good combination there of like topic sentence, development of the idea, and as a sort of an arrow in your quiver, so to speak, if you can create a paragraph that would be a definition paragraph, then followed by an example paragraph, not the most complex type of discussion, but going back to my sports analogy, sorry to alienate everybody with the sports analogy. If you played football, or you played like I played a little bit of football, so like blocking and tackling was something like we learned from the very beginning. And if you watch the pros, they're sort of doing it as well. Like, it's like gymnastics with the bouncing. Boxing, it's going to be jabbing. This is sort of the baseline for it. So look at these, sort of read them over, but really well done. And like I said, I find that some of these papers that are more about like these internet subcultures could be really fascinating. Okay, now I had another, and this sort of comes out of this 4chan space here. It sort of shows the evolution. Now that's going to be a very famous SoundCloud rapper, has some conspiracy theories around it. But the student, I think, wanted to show how there's this sort of evolution with the memes. So that's just an idea you can sort of use as the paper progresses, if that makes sense. Because students always sort of struggle with the flow of certain papers. Now I would argue that this one has a very specific structure to it, because it's going to rely on the proposal of it. So sort of use that as a baseline. And historically, I've had a fair amount of papers on Scientology. Now, Scientology, by 90% of people, I think, would be considered a cult. And a fair amount of papers on it. No, it's really interesting. There's been documentaries on Scientology, so I'm sure if you looked at like a Google Trends with their sort of map for like searches, it would be pretty interesting to see this timed with their documentaries. Now, there's a book that was big. I'm in my late 40s, so when it was the Dianetics, was a book that L. Ron Hubbard, who's pictured here on the left, I don't know if you guys can see my hands, but he was the inventor of Scientology, and it's sort of a combination, from what I understand, of like psychoanalysis and then sort of pop culture. I was watching something on because I had a paper on manifesting last year. It's like this sort of internet phenomenon. And I feel like that has elements of like a Scientology to it. So anyway, I had a paper on that. And the student described the process that Scientology goes through. Okay, so think about this. You want to use it as the base of the proposal. And if you go to the proposal, this idea of hierarchy is in place. Okay, so they took this idea of process and they expanded it into Scientology. And a really good job with the citation there, although I feel like that citation is in MLA. It should have a comma if it was APA, but you get this sort of idea for it. And they mentioned the beginning of the paragraph with the hierarchy, and then they break that down using the sources there. And a really good blend of like percentage of source versus their own analysis. So pause that. Yeah, fascinating group. And so think about this: they had a definition paragraph. Now these aren't. We're looking at paragraphs from different essays, but they took a process paragraph, definition paragraph, and the example paragraph. You could do that for your specific group. Okay. All right, good. Now, the anti-vaxxers is going to be a big one. This one took off like sort of a wildfire during COVID. Although, like anti-vaccination, as this photo shows, I want to say this is from 1800s maybe. There has been an anti-vaccination movement, but it sort of came to the head during the COVID years. And students, they ran with this one. A lot of my nursing majors over here at LaSalle wrote papers on it, so it's a really good fit for them. And one of the things that students talked about was going to be this idea of cause and effect. Okay, so if you look at the proposal, which we're trying to base this off of, one of those ideas was the common goals. So they have that in the topic sentence, and then they have this idea of cause and effect in the actual paragraph. So they're connected. Now, you as a writer making decisions, you can maybe turn this into two separate paragraphs, or that's the beauty of the writing process. Student A's essay versus student B's essay going to be completely different, or similar. And if you look here and you pause this one, I'm going to pause. My big head and my big beard is in this photo here, but you can see they mentioned the interview, right? So got a few questions about the interviews, how you tie that in. That is a really good one. And it's nice because it's a cause and effect, give you another option for a paragraph, uses the proposal, breaks that down, then it applies the interview to it. So it gets the primary sources. That is a really, I mean, I double check it for grammar, but in terms of structure, it's going to be a good grade for that one. Okay. All right, good. Now we got another one here that's really divisive. No, I mean, it's not really divisive. It's scary, right? So now it's really fascinating to be a professor at multiple levels. So if you have aspirations for that, I'd highly recommend it. But one of the things that I've seen over time is that these discourse communities and sort of like conspiratorial groups ebb and flow over time. So I want to say last fall there was a Netflix documentary about this group called the RDLS, which should not be confused with the what we think of as the Mormon Church or the Latter-day Saints, as they want to be called now. Now, me personally, growing up in Virginia, I didn't know anybody that was Mormon. One of my friends actually converted, and there was a actual Mormon church in my hometown, but wasn't a high concentration of Mormons. But I have been endlessly fascinated with Mormon history. I'm not Mormon, and I don't really know many people that are. It's just one of those things. I think Mormon history really captures so many different things that have occurred. And my book I'm working on is actually connected to the Book of Mormon in a sort of complicated way. A different lecture for a different time. I'm trying to get my book out by October of this year, so really working hard on that. But long story short was I had a paper on the RLDS, which in the schism of Mormonism was a group that they believe they're sort of still in line with some of the original teachings of Mormonism. So if you know anybody that goes to BYU, they would be connected with the Latter-day Saints movement, and this is like a cult type group associated with it. Although some people in my class have said that the Mormons are a form of a cult, but I would say, in my opinion, they're not. But that's definitely something that people would debate. But this group definitely is. So the gentleman, the gentleman, oh my God, the bad guy there is named Warren Jeffs, and he's considered the prophet of the group. And he's in jail now because of this structure he has, that any cult group has like sort of like multiple elements to it, and he follows that pattern. So now, like I said before, that's going to be Brigham Young on the right of the screen with the beard, okay, and then you have the RDLS prophets, and not to get too into it, but it crosses over into some of the Mormon history, but like they're two separate groups, because I just want to stress that, like as a sort of a scholar of them, and also like if somebody would see the video, a Mormon LDS is not the same as those. So student read about that, and the segue for this is they went through and they described how that, going back to that last discussion, how the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, what they call the FLDS, I think I was saying that right, FDLS, which is the cult group, and how they're different than the Salt Lake Mormons. Okay, so really well done with this. Now this can be probably a pretty specific area to look at, and being a fan of Mormon history, I was sort of like really involved with this. But you can see here they also maybe pause it. They look at the idea of cult, and they talk about a religious text, which is going to be sort of like the documents that they use, and that also from this sort of perspective of epidictic, deliberative, and forensic. that is going to be a forensic source that looks at sort of the history of it. So it's just really well done. And I want to say they also included an interview there. So like, what is the right? Multiple birds with one stone. So pause it, comparative contrast. And then this paragraph is something called a division paragraph, where they're showing how the group is different. Okay, so read those. You know, if you think about a division paragraph, imagine all these like a conversation. You know, I don't know if anybody's a music fan. I sort of grew up a music fan, but trying to think of like a musician most people would know. All right, so like I grew up in the '90s. Nirvana was huge. I wasn't into that type of thing. But if you wanted to show how the Foo Fighters were the same or different than Nirvana, you can say they're overproduced or whatever you want to do. Division would show they're different, and then a classification paragraph would show they're similar. So this paragraph, you pause it here, it's looking at this fundamentalist Latter-day Saint movement, and it's showing how it's different, how it diverts from it. Okay. All right, good. So that's, you know, another option for you. And, you know, I went through the archives and found some of these, and it was almost like pretty impressed with the level of writing that some of these students have done in my classes. Now, there's one group here. This is the last one. It's a group called the Transhumanist Movement. And I don't know if anybody's heard of them before. I really hadn't heard much about them before, but I had one of my best connection students, and he read about this transhumanist movement and basically said that they're a group that wants to integrate in technology into the human experience. Okay, that's maybe a really wide brush, and they have a political movement. Now, I want to say the individual on the left with the metal piece coming out of his head is an artist who uses that metal piece to be able to have different sensory experiences. So this does sort of like start to go into like the psychedelic type of thing. Like it's got some connections with it, but it's different, right? So if I was writing that paper, I may want to differentiate how they're different from that. And the other person has a specific bionic eye. So the idea of the transhumanist movement is, as a society, we need to integrate it, not be sort of fearful of AI and different types of technology, and blend that in. So a really interesting angle for a psychology paper. And a student wrote a classification paper, okay, and pause and read it, and they looked at how transhumanist was similar. And I want to say they looked at Rene Descartes, who is if you ever take a philosophy class, he's a good one. You're going to read him. He said, "I think, therefore I am." He was a French philosopher. I want to say he was really rich, and he like wrote a lot, right? And I want to say he watched wax candles melt, if I ever remember from my philosophy class days. Okay, so you can see here they're showing how it's similar, and a division paragraph is showing how it's different, and compare and contrast is like sort of the idea. So really, if you look at a compare and contrast paper, you can think about them also as like division and classification. So I just went through, shows a definition, an example paragraph, a process paragraph, a classification, a cause and effect, a division paragraph. And keep in mind, like I want to do this video, pause these and look at them. They're really well done. I think they mentioned Google Glasses in this one, which everybody was sort of really fearful of. What year was that? Like 2013. Everybody was really concerned about that. Then look at these, but hopefully these examples will help you out as you read the paper. Really great job with these. I'm going to try my best to get the annotations graded, but let me know if you need anything, and that's it.